Doctor, reluctantly we let you go. As 2017 came to a close, the year wasn't the only thing that ended in December. Christmas Day marked the end of one of the most controversial periods in the history of Doctor Who, the Capaldi era. While yes, said controversy isn't entirely on Capaldi, a lot of it is leveled towards the directions the show went as far as the stories and even the routes the writers opted to take with the characters. Many were quick to voice their dissatisfaction about having a Doctor who was grumpy, rude, anti-authoritarian, and occasionally unpleasant, which of course is a slap in the face of the character as it resembles no other previous Doctor. No other previous Doctor. No other. You know what? Tennant has moved on. Why can't you? Not all the Doctors can be currency for your spank bank. Come to peace with it! It's fair to say that many did not wish to give Capaldi a fair shot, and because the stories opted to go down a more turbulent road, it didn't make it easy for audiences to click with this ostensibly different iteration of the character. However, as the Doctor has always tried to teach us to embrace change, it is in that spirit that today on Close Examinations, we're going to examine the path of 12 throughout the years. While it's inevitable to discuss the companions on their own, we are going to set out to keep the focus on the 12th Doctor himself and what made him a quintessential incarnation. So, set your amp to 12, slap on the sonic shades, and let's kick off with a bit of history. 2013 was a hell of a year for Doctor Who fans. We had a new companion, a surprise revelation of a Doctor we never knew existed, segueing into what was sure to be a monumental celebration for the 50th anniversary. Even that boasted some unexpected fruits with the 5-ish Doctors reboot, the surprise return of Paul McGann for a prologue which provided us with some long-demanded closure of a thoroughly underappreciated Doctor. The one major cloud over the head of the celebrations was Matt Smith's announcement that the Christmas special would be his last. This, of course, threw the internet into an uproar, as this announcement usually does. Would they finally pull the trigger on the Doctor being a woman, another ethnicity, etc.? While Moffat did tickle with the idea of going that route, they knew that the new series fans would have a hard time with a drastic change of that magnitude. After all, the Doctors, as New Who fans saw them, ranged from handsome to sexy to pretty. In lieu of that, Moffat still wanted to do something different and striking, and, as it happened, one thing he really wanted was to have an older Doctor. In fact, before he cast Matt Smith, he was gunning for an older actor. He just didn't expect that Matt Smith would completely destroy the competition. This time, Moffat stuck to his guns, and for extra measure, he had always wanted seasoned actor Peter Capaldi to play the Doctor. Capaldi had made it known when he played a guest role in The Fires of Pompeii that not only was he a Doctor Who fan, but he had been a Doctor Who fan from the beginning. He had even wrote to the Radio Times voicing his love for the show for years, so he was just happy to be in a Doctor Who episode. Moffat had concerns that an actor of Capaldi's pedigree would want to commit to a show as gargantuan as Doctor Who, particularly on a reduced salary, but Capaldi wanted to play the role so badly, he took a pay cut. This was a huge deal. People forget, not only was Capaldi a celebrated actor of considerable prestige, but he was also an Oscar-winning filmmaker. So, on August 4th, 2013, on a very unprecedented simulcast worldwide, he was announced to take on the role. For classic series fans, the casting of an older Doctor signified that they were aiming to bring back the classic feel of the original series, the days of Pertwee, even Hartnell. Even more open-minded new series fans were ecstatic because compared to what they were used to, this was a welcome change. The hormonally unbalanced Tennant fangirls, not so enthusiastic. But then again, these are the girls who actually said, and I quote, "It's Tennant, he can kill grave me anytime." Yeah, to quote another famous Capaldi character,
"Fuckity bye."
By and large, the majority was highly enthusiastic about this decision, and were quick to rebut any ill-informed naysayers who claimed that the Doctor can't be older. Cough. So the anticipation of his debut episode was palpable. The first two episodes were even directed by celebrated filmmaker Ben Wheatley. Did it work? Well, not only is it debatable, the fact that there is even a reason to debate leads us to ponder if the divisive nature of Capaldi's era as a whole was actually part of its charm. Instead of following on from the daring-do and whimsy of Tennant and Smith, Moffat and company opted to make the 12th Doctor more aloof, more grouchy, and even inconsiderate. Traits which New Who fans were definitely not used to. In the episode Deep Breath, they actually have Clara's reaction to the new Doctor echo the reaction of fangirls who really only watched the previous Doctors for eye candy. Like Clara in Season 8, this was an obstacle in the relationship, and like any relationship, it takes work and understanding to accept change. change. The final scene in the episode has the Doctor still insisting to Clara that he is still the Doctor, and a timid Clara decides to give him a chance. Now, in all the past post-regeneration stories, the new Doctor always seems to stabilize by the very end of the story, and they have a firm grip on what sort of man they are. The most unique thing about the 12th Doctor era is that it's not that easy. By the very end of Deep Breath, there is still a serious underlying dread that comes from his uncertainty. Yes, he is still the Crusader for good, but how far is this incarnation willing to go? There's an unsettling ambiguity as to whether or not the Doctor murdered the clockwork droid. By the end of this story, audiences weren't sure how to take this decidedly more morose Doctor. And the fascinating thing is, the Doctor wasn't sure either. In fact, the dominant character arc in the season all revolves around the Doctor actually trying to get a bearing on his identity. In the episode Into the Dalek, the Doctor wrestles with his instinct to destroy Rusty the Dalek, and his deeply ingrained hope that Daleks can get better. When Rusty is repaired and begins going on a killing spree, the Doctor just accepts defeat and is content to kill Rusty from the inside out. But it was Clara who gave him a good 5 across the eyes to remind him that for a brief moment, a Dalek could be good, and it was possible to make him that again. And it was in that moment that the Doctor realized how badly he needed Clara. And while we're on the subject, so much has been said about people's dissatisfaction with Clara as a character, and while she won't be popping up in my top 10 companions, I'm gonna say it. She was fine as a companion, she just wasn't great. Trust me, none of you were there for the dark days of Adric, Mel, or Tegan. At least Clara was proactive, brave. She actually looked like she was having a fun time, even in crises, and cared about the sanctity of life. So much so that she was willing to potentially sacrifice her life multiple times to save a friend. If there's any criticisms that can be justified, is that she never had a consistent character arc like any of the other companions in the new series. However, when it came to her merit as a companion, she definitely deserves praise for her courage, empathy, and resourcefulness, which are traits that the Doctor is always meant to inspire in his friends. As it happens, the Doctor's dependency on his companions is heavily explored in this season, not just for assisting him in respective crises, but for the solace they provide him. This is a time in the Doctor's life where he needs someone to guide him back to the man who cares. The notoriously divisive episode Listen was, in actuality, an introspective story about the Doctor trying to deconstruct a pivotal moment in his childhood, where a voice spoke to him in the night telling him that fear doesn't have to hurt. The Doctor was trying to figure out the truth about that night by deducing what the entity was that was under his bed, little knowing that it was Clara the whole time. This was the night that represented the Doctor's first real brush with inspiration, and he was trying to deconstruct that moment in order to figure out how to recapture that moment and find himself again. Clara, discovering that she was the person who gave the young Doctor the solace he needed as a child, made her realize how much the Doctor needed her, and made her even more torn between this life and the life she was building for herself at home. It's in the Doctor's nature to fight injustice wherever it may dwell, but because he was still uncertain as to his identity, he was more impatient and thoughtless. In the episode Kill the Moon, the Doctor is faced with an impossible conflict, but knows that it's not his decision to make. While he's definitely not right to force them to make the decision by abandoning them, he is absolutely right that mankind needs to make the big choices on their own. If the Doctor handled it any other way, Clara would, in all likelihood, appreciate that gesture. As it is, he didn't, and Clara confronts him with the reality that he still has an obligation to guide mankind as much as allow them their freedom. When it seems possible the Doctor could lose Clara, you could see him become that lost little boy again. That's when you realize that while the 11th Doctor was an old man in a young man's body, the 12th Doctor was very clearly the opposite. A lost boy in an old man's body. He's confused and unsure of how to interact with people. He tries to be distant. He tries to own the image of the gruff, angry old man, and that only makes him seem cold in the eyes of anyone around him. Danny Pink even calls him out being a general, an order giver who pushes people to their limits while he stands on the sidelines. And what scares the Doctor is that Danny might be right. This nearly pushes Clara to the brink, but when she sees that he's doing it because of his uncertainty, she sees that he is still trying to do good, but he's lost that ability to empathize. She decides to stay with him, and this time shoulder the burden, to carry the weight of being the Doctor and help him make the hard calls. And while this does help, the Doctor soon becomes worried that not only is he asking too much of Clara, but that she's becoming addicted to it. When Missy reveals that she was the one who put them together, the Doctor sees that all he's done is damage Clara's life to the point where she's forced to pull the trigger on someone she loves, and in her grief be willing to die getting crushed in the arms of a Cyberman. In the finale, Death in Heaven, you see the Doctor constantly being shoehorned into the role of an authority figure, a role he has made many attempts to refuse in incarnations past, and in this story you see him tempted by it, as it clearly has perks. Missy tries to get him to embrace that role by gifting him with the perfect renewable army. And then, upon seeing Clara in the gentle embrace of what he thought was a monster, the Doctor realizes no. He doesn't have to be this way. He doesn't have to be a leader. All he needs is an unreliable blue box and a friend to show him the way, because in the end, he is an idiot. And when you reflect upon his history, the Doctor has always been an idiot. The majority of his adventures always seem to start with him blundering in and matter-of-factly saving the day by actually looking for a ridiculous solution. Where most sci-fi heroes would go in guns blazing to take on the Daleks, the Doctor would trick the Daleks into killing themselves. Where any sci-fi hero would beat the hell out of Kazran Sardik and force him to let that liner land safely, the Doctor sees the potential for good and plays the long game and redeem the man, all because he can. In the episode Closing Time, the Doctor discovers that strong human emotion can counteract cyber conversion, and seeing a converted Danny Pink gently consoling Clara reminds the Doctor that there is always a better solution. It's just that sometimes he can be a bit thick. In the end of the season, the Doctor is elated with the knowledge that he is a bumbler and sometimes a twit, and that is wonderful. After this revelation, you can see the 12th Doctor's demeanor lighten significantly. By the beginning of Series 9, he's much more outgoing, empathetic, and less cold. The season opener, The Magician's Apprentice / The Witch's Familiar, puts that to the test, as we see the Doctor deal with a conflict he never thought he would ever have to confront, involving meeting a young Davros and realizing that he had a choice to save him or let him die. And just when you think the Doctor's capacity for good has all but been destroyed by Davros' duplicity, he discovers in the 0 second that Daleks may actually have the ability to show mercy. Unfortunately, we the audience also discover something else in that story. We see how far the Doctor is willing to go to protect his best friend, and what's worse, we see how vengeful he can be if ever she were to die. The Doctor is willing to give up some of his regeneration energy to destroy the entire Dalek city in one fell swoop. This hints at the overall arc of the season, and, credit where it's due, this is the most subtle arc in the entire run of the new series. In the season, there's an allusion to an entity called the Hybrid. All that is known is that it's the combination of two warrior races, and that it would cause the end of everything. It's then revealed that the Hybrid was never one entity, but two operating as one, and that one will move heaven and earth to stay with the other. As the Doctor stares out into the abyss at the end of the universe, he realizes that the reason Missy paired the Doctor with Clara is because she knew how dependent on her the Doctor would become. In the episode Death in Heaven, Missy even mocks how quick the Doctor is to come to Clara's call when madness and chaos are happening all around him. And that's not even the least insane thing the Doctor does to stay with Clara. The Doctor floods a village and remains in stasis for an extended period of time. He remains trapped in a confession dial on a loop in perpetual torment for billions of years as penance for letting Clara die. But most dangerously, he nearly causes a temporal paradox to save Clara from a death that she was willing to accept, and in doing so he causes mass chaos on Gallifrey and risks the end of everything. Clara was the person who helped the Doctor during his time of confusion and disillusionment, and he has found no end of solace in her company, but they both knew that they had become addicted to each other, to a dangerous extreme. Clara already paid for it with her life. Though the Doctor gave her more time, she saw that he was becoming dangerous in his pursuit of saving her. So she made the decision to make the Doctor forget her and left him to confront her inevitable fate. The long way round. While forgetting Clara enabled the Doctor to move on, unfortunately he still felt as though he lost something, a feeling made worse when he was forced to confront that inevitable final meeting with River Song. As we've known for some time, the Doctor hates endings. He hates them because they're inevitable. The sad truth is, all the Doctor ever sees is endings. He travels through time because that's his desperate measure to keep things going and never stop. Unfortunately, he knows that it's just a placebo. He knows that with everything, planets, stars, enemies, and friends, he has to face the inevitability of change, resolution, and ultimately, expiration. After River Song's death, the Doctor decided to avoid the pangs of loneliness, firstly by building, or more accurately rebuild, a friend, and bury himself in his responsibilities. So, when we see him again in The Return of Dr. Mysterio, he's more gung-ho about the job, hiding his grief by reveling in the mad whirl of his life, and then, in the midst of this whirl, he actually finds new purpose when he stumbles upon Missy again. This time, Missy finds herself at the Doctor's mercy, on the cusp of a final death. Fortunately, she caught the Doctor at a good time as he forgoes her execution and decides to make good on his commitment to rehabilitate his longtime nemesis with the hope to find his friend under centuries of malice and bloodshed. After all, if the Doctor was able to find himself again with the help of his friends, logically, couldn't Missy find herself again with the help of her friend? It's at this point during the Capaldi era that we come to the realization that, of all the Doctor's runs, the 12th Doctor has consistently been about the fundamental question: who am I, and what am I supposed to do? The 12th Doctor arrived against the natural law of the Time Lord's lifespan. Prior to this, when he spent 700 years defending Trenzalore, he had given everything to defending all that he held dear. He had come to peace with himself and his involvement with the Time War by saving Gallifrey. He was ready to die. So it came as a surprise to him that he would be granted more regenerations, and that he would be back to his old life. But when you've lived for so long devoted to one simple task, it's easy for you to forget what you are to yourself. Interestingly enough, this isn't the first time this has happened to the Doctor. Back in his 8th incarnation, the Doctor found himself marooned on the aquatic planet of Orbis. Big Finish is canon, bitches! There he remained for 600 years defending the indigenous population from hostile takeover. He had been there for so long that he forgot about his friend Lucy Miller, and more importantly, he forgot what he meant to the universe as a whole. So when he was forcibly removed from Orbis, he had to remind himself why he cared so much, and why he was needed. For someone who has seen the wide expanse of reality and saved it on multiple occasions, as the Doctor has, living a simple life defending one place, one time, and one purpose tends to narrow the gaze. Then, when you're forcibly removed from that cause, it can be disorienting. Before the 12th Doctor arrived, he was previously an enthusiastic, joie de vivre eccentric. Now he looks in the mirror and only sees anger and confusion, as if the weight of his previous lifespan had collapsed and he fears that his new face had become a reflection of what may come. Very nearly. So, keep this in mind as we return to this vital moment, when the 12th Doctor decides to dedicate himself to rehabilitating Missy. The Doctor had fallen into a dark place, and with the help of those close to him, he came back to being that mischievous, fun-spirited madman. He knows how hard it is to come back, and what's more, he knows how easy it is to slip back into that darkness. The definitive break the cycle speech in the Zygon inversion reflects this point beautifully as we see the Doctor we love, confident and charismatic, slowly melt away and reveal the horrors of his past bubbling to the surface. What's more, he brings this out deliberately to show how immediately damaging war can be, even for the best of us. And what keeps the Doctor from falling into this despair are the times when his faith in people is vindicated, as you can see at the end of the episode when a reformed Zygon opts to continue protecting the Earth. Having seen firsthand how even the worst of us can be redeemed, the Doctor is confident that he can redeem his old friend, and seeing the extent of his mercy, Missy was finally willing to listen. It's safe to conclude at this point in the examination the significant parallels between the 12th Doctor and Missy. She tried to tempt him to go dark on multiple occasions, and not only was the Doctor unwavering in this resolve, in fact, he found himself imbued with a new sense of purpose. It can be safe to conclude that this behavior totally bewilders Missy. The final push for her was seeing the Doctor spare her life when she was on the chopping block. Instead of punishing her for her crimes, he sought to help her get better. Throughout the course of Series 10, we see that Missy is actually genuine in her desire to reform, and that she was moved by the Doctor's unyielding hope to save his friend. Her ultimate test came in the Series 10 finale, when she ran into her previous self. While you definitely see her temptation to relapse, she didn't waste time in taking her predecessor down a peg. You can see how profoundly the Doctor had affected her when the Doctor gives an impassioned speech about doing the right thing in lieu of the odds. In her final minutes, she ended the life of her predecessor, knowing that he would regenerate into her. This act would ensure that Missy would always find herself here, even if that would mean her final death. This was a strong, redemptive arc for a classic Doctor Who villain, and it never would have happened were it not for the Doctor's guidance. But here's the ultimate tragedy of it. The Doctor didn't see her make this sacrifice. For all he knew, Missy did bail, and that he was ultimately wrong. This was just another weight on the Doctor's shoulders to go with the very strong possibility of losing the fight to the Cybermen, and the fact that Nardole may have to carry on the fight without him and in all likelihood perish. Not to mention the fact that his friend and pupil had been converted into a Cyberman, all because he couldn't get there on time. All the Doctor can do at this point is the best he can before he breathes his last. At his end, he lay upon a scorched land, dying, left with the dubious knowledge that his efforts may very well been all for naught. He'll never know that Missy actually redeemed herself, that Nardole escaped with the survivors and will keep the good fight going, or that Bill was resurrected by Heather and is off to lead a happy life among the stars. In what we thought would be his final moments as the Doctor, he was left despondent and dejected and wasn't sure if he was actually going to continue on. He had already lived longer than he should, and he spent his whole life finding himself, only to be met with more loss. In life, as inevitable as the rain, we all encounter tragedy, loss, and disappointments in the brief span that we walk this earth. The Doctor is over 2,000 years old. Can you just imagine how much harder it is to press on? Particularly when he finds himself surrounded by what he perceives to be his failures. Then, he arrived where he started, on a frigid plain in the Arctic where he found himself meeting his first incarnation. Soon, we discover that even the first Doctor was afraid of the change. What's fascinating is that the first Doctor was intimidated by the change because of the unknown. He had no idea what would come from regeneration, having never done it before. On the other end of the spectrum, the 12th Doctor refuses to change because of what he does know. Many lives of battle, loss, and pain. The 12th Doctor had worked so hard to regain his joy of life, and in that moment he was relapsing. He was in danger of falling into despair again. Fortunately, at the 0 minute, the Doctor is reminded of the value his life has to the universe when he saves the life of a soldier who turns out to be the grandfather of one of his closest friends. Seeing all the good that he would do in his future, the first Doctor is finally content to take that first step. The 12th, on the other hand. To understand his reluctance, let's look at the character of the soldier. As we establish upon meeting him, the soldier is undoubtedly a good man. We meet him staring down another terrified soldier, guns trained on each other, and both not wishing to take a life even in self-defense. The soldier is settled, knowing that this may very well be his end, and he thinks he has come to peace with it. He's surrounded by death and is completely devoid of hope. Sound familiar? The soldier has a temporary reprieve and has a chance to gain some perspective. He realizes that he may not be as ready as he thought. The Doctor's path is the same. We left him in the midst of battle, surrounded by enemies and despair. This was going to be a teary farewell one way or another, and in the end it was all up to the Doctor as to whether or not it would be his last. However, much like how the soldier got a reprieve to contemplate mortality, the Doctor got that same reprieve by being reminded via his original self and the some memories of his friends that not only will he be missed, he will still be needed. In the end, though, he was still tempted to let go. His encounters in his last hours proved to be more persuasive to give it another go, and because he took that step imbued with hope and optimism, it definitely gives us hope for the future. So, as we close the book on the Capaldi era, it's wise to reflect on what made his era so unique in Doctor Who. As this examination has showed, the Capaldi era actually was one of the few that had a consistent character arc all throughout. In the beginning, he was confused, angry, and uncertain, and soon he learned who he was and managed to regain his joie de vivre. He sought to help a friend the way the friends helped him, and when he nearly relapsed, he was saved at the last minute by himself. Though the first, third, and ninth Doctors all had arc to varying degrees, none of them remained consistent all the way through. Sure, the mystery of the silence haunted the 11th Doctor, but that arc wasn't about his own personal development. He remained that lovable, vivacious buffoon with a slightly dark edge all throughout. The 12th Doctor's entire journey was all about rediscovery of himself, his mission, and his place in the universe. And though we have an interesting road ahead, you can bet, pounds to pastries, that this era will be one that will merit passionate reflection in the hearts and minds of Doctor Who fans for generations to come. Did you find this examination intriguing? Has it maybe forced you to reevaluate your position on the Capaldi era? Leave it in the comments below. And for more addictive content on Narcotic Casserole, simply like, share, subscribe, click, thou shalt be served.